Welcome back to This Is How We Create. My name is Martine Severin, your host. Today, I'm so pleased to have two very special guests on the podcast. First, we have Cauleen Smith, who's joining us, and we will be hearing about her in just a little bit. But we do have a recurring guest. Her name is Danielle A. Scruggs. You've probably heard of her. Cauleen, welcome to the show. And Danielle, welcome back.
Thank you.
So, Colleen, you said that an accidental film aesthetics class at San Francisco State decoded media for you. Can you talk a little bit about what you were actually seeing for the first time when those images got decoded?
I think, like most people, I'd always sort of watched movies very passively and was not really aware that there were so many decisions being made that created meaning just in the way things were framed or presented or edited together. And when I took the film aesthetics class, everything was literally broken down by shots and what kinds of shots and why do you use certain shots at certain times. Like, will you use a close up to like become more intimate and to create intensity, or you use a wide shot to describe a landscape or place someone in it? Just simple things like that that we sort of read very passively and intuitively. But when you start to analyze a film and think about the decisions made of when these shots are presented and where, you start to be able to access a lot more meaning in the films. And it was really illuminating to me because that's when I started to understand how these films almost subconsciously train the audience who is valuable in the world and who is not valuable, or what is valuable in the world and what is not valuable. And it's a language and a syntax and a grammar of cinema, what they call classical cinema, that everyone is taught kind of unthinkingly, I think. But became to me the most interesting thing about cinema was its power to use this invisible language, invisible being that you kind of have to be really trained to see it. This power to use this grammar to influence the way we understand ourselves. And I thought that was a tremendous power. And I was recognizing the power it had had over me as a person as well, you know.
It's so interesting that so often society really does a great way and it reinforces it in so many instances as to who is valuable and who isn't, whose story gets told and who doesn't get told. And until you said those words, I hadn't really thought about all of those pointers that I was getting, no matter like day in and day out, whether it's looking at media, whether it's looking at a billboard or looking at a commercial. Wow. This episode is brought to you by iCode. Every child starts as a creator. They imagine stories, build worlds, and ask big questions. But as they grow up, creativity can take a backseat to routine and screens. That's where iCode comes in. Through after-school STEM activities, iCode's programs give kids a space to create again. Visit icodeschool.com to book a free trial. So that must have really just rocked your world. Had you been aware of that division before, or those stories that were being told before?
I think I was always vaguely aware that there was something about watching television or movies or media that really troubled me, and I didn't quite know what it was. And once I learned about, the grammar and syntax of cinema, then it all made sense. And I realized that the way in which I was being made to feel was actually quite deliberate on the part of the makers, and whether they knew it or not. And that in the sense that they're very much using the power cinema to assign value and to center certain points of view over and to diminish others, and that's just a part of the like form of filmmaking. You have to make decisions about who is centered and who is marginal. And so once I realized that, I became really interested in, I guess, having this kind of project of using those same tools to center the people that I cared about and to value the people that I cared about.
And I think that that's so, I'm really glad that you said that about how decisions are made about who's centered and who is marginal. Because one of the things that there's a lot of things that I really like about Dry Long So, but one of the things that I really liked about it was that people who would normally be dismissed are like are centered and given a certain kind of dignity that like aren't always afforded to people. Like for example, the woman who I believe she was unhoused, but she was kind of like always commenting on, everything that was happening in the neighborhood. And normally like that's someone who would just be kind of either ignored or just in the background or played for laughs even. But I really like that you brought dignity to that character. And I guess like I was wondering, like once you were like more aware of like that grammar and that syntax of cinema, like how you made certain decisions to kind of like flip that grammar like on its head a little bit.
I think one of the really crucial things I wanted to do in Dry Long So was to make Black girls really beautiful. And that's something that I think the only other filmmaker until Ryan Coogler, to be frank, to do that is Julie Dash. And I really mean that not in a hyperbolic way, but in a quite literal way. Directors do not take the time to light or be concerned with the finish or glow of Black actress and Black actor skin. And that became one of my really central fixations. And I approached it in like a kind of old, early, like pre-war American cinema style where regardless of the theme of the film, the actors would always glow even if they're crying, even if someone's dying. That was like a very deliberate decision first. And then narratively, I realized that even I grew up comfortably middle class, but like most African Americans have total like close connections with people who are not. And my concern for their safety and well being is a constant thing. So I wanted to tell a story about that kind of a person dealing with those kinds of circumstances. I wouldn't have had the language for it then, but now thank goodness there is language for this notion of like Black respectability. And I feel like that's also been one of the things in cinema and in television in particular. I mean, if you're thinking about the Huxtables, that has just been sort of like relentlessly enforced as a value, so that even within Black media and entertainment, poor and working class people are marginalized or used as comedic relief or cannon fodder, or it's okay to abuse or humiliate them in ways that the central hero is spared. And the reason that that happens in Black cinema is because of the way that cinema kind of inherently works as a visual language and system, you know? So you actually have to actively fight against or argue against the actual mechanisms of cinema to change that, which is what I was really trying to do in Dry Long. So, you know.
Danielle, do you have a follow-up question?
Actually, yeah, I was just kind of absorbing what you were saying.
I didn't
But
wanna
yeah.
jump over
Yeah,
you.
oh, yeah, no, no, of course. Yeah, no, I was just, like, absorbing that, and actually I can relate to that because even though I'm not a filmmaker, I'm a photographer, but it's kind of like that same thing is in photography and especially photojournalism as well. Like, there's that same kind of, like, the way you frame certain things or the way you leave certain things out, but then you're told, like, "Oh, like, that's objectivity," and it's like, "Is it really?" And so and then what you were saying too about like you have to kind of like actively work against how this medium is usually like how you're usually told to operate. Like you have to like really actively work against it to like create something that's not reinforcing stereotypes, that's not reinforcing, a certain kind of like political lens that could actually end up being harmful. So just kind of like absorbing what you were
Yeah.
saying there. But I can definitely relate to that even though I'm not a filmmaker myself.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think in photo editing, I think one of the more egregious violators or like the most violent deployment of degrading Black images is the New York Times, where whenever there's some kind of like national disaster or anything, they really find a way to present images of Black people where they just suggest that crime is happening or that is something wrong is being done. I remember when Haiti went through that really devastating earthquake, the most compelling thing that happened was that how the way in which Haitians with total dignity and patience waited for aid. Like they would sit down at the truck and wait. But everyone was so hungry and desperate for a riot that even though there were no images of riots because it wasn't happening, I will never forget this. They found this image of a man using a knife to open up a bag of rice and then said, oh, like tension around. They suggested that a riot was going to happen with this image of this black man with this knife. And I'm like, wow, that it's just, there's no factual problem with this headline and this image, but the way that the mechanisms of language and image and text work together makes a third meaning, and they know that, and that's why they did it. And it still infuriates me to this day when I see that.
I actually was like kind of curious, like, because I know like I kind of feel that tension sometimes between like using something that's been historically used against me, like trying to figure out a way to like, how do you use that in a way to like kind of tell a different story or tell like a more full story? So I was wondering like what that process is like for you, not just in filmmaking, but just in all the different artistic mediums that you work in.
Well, one, I just really center the topic that I want to talk about, and I just try and honor and respect that topic. And I think that kind of goes a long way. And I can recognize that in other people's work. Even when I think they are making some decisions naively, I can see a real kind of like dedication and love to the topic. And like recently, I saw a film. I really loved that film with SZA and Kiki Palmer, One of Them Days. I actually felt like it was like a comedy version of Dry Longso in so many ways, and I loved it so much, and I thought that the people making that film actually really did know South LA, and they know those girls in those apartment complexes, which is like a real thing. I mean, they warmed it up a lot, but that's like a real thing. And like, I felt like all of the characters, like the hairdresser or the mean girl even. I mean, I absolutely love those characters, and I thought, like there might have been like particular camera shots or angles that I thought were what I would call naive, like where they're not really understanding what that shot does to the figure or whatever. But I thought that the actual impulse of the film was so great and so funny. And I was like, oh, I wish I'd made Dry Lonzo to be a comedy like this. This is incredible. Like, so
That is funny. I really enjoyed that movie. I know, so I grew up in an apartment complex and I recognize so many of those characters as well. So I'd love to turn the conversation to talking a little bit about Utopia. So you've researched Alice Coltrane's ashram, Rebecca Cox Jackson's Shaker community, Noah Purifoy's desert sculptures, and all of these are attempts at, I'd say, a radical feminist utopia. Can you talk a little bit about utopia in terms of what makes it successful to you, or, even if it doesn't last, what does make it successful to you?
sure. And thanks for describing the film I made Sojourner so well, because usually people really focus on the Alice Coltrane component of the film and let like the study of Rebecca Cox Jackson or the Combahee River Collective or Nora Purifoy Deserts Museum. Those are sort of incidental, I guess. And so thanks for that, for one thing, because the film really was a study of all these different instances of a single individual trying to make space in the world for more than just themselves, for more people than just themselves. Even Simon Rodia's Watts Towers, he's an Italian cis male immigrant, but what he built is like it's embedded all over in the mosaics. He writes Nuestro Pueblo, which means our town. And so even in his solitary eccentric making, he's making for a larger body than himself, which is so moving, and it still stands today as this gift to this community. And Noah Purifoy, started at the Watts Towers. Not He didn't start there, but he built the Watts Towers into an art center, and then eventually moved into the desert, which people always romanticize the desert as this place of aloneness. But then he goes out there and sort of builds and collaborates and makes a space that anyone to this day can come and visit free of charge. There's no fence, there's no barrier to experience and engage with these amazing artworks. It's like a truly generous project. like just like the Watchtowers themselves. And then you have Rebecca Cox Jackson, this woman with these prophetic spiritual powers who isn't really allowed or welcomed into any traditional sort of like Black AME churches because of their patriarchal structure. But she finds the Shakers, which were had a female godhead and divided the sexes so that each gender had its like a kind of complete agency and well-defined ways of contributing to the community. And there she finds like a freedom to be heard and to have her voice and to participate, but quickly realized, and the Shakers lived in their own communes, and but she eventually struggled with them because I believe, and it's sort of hinted in her very eccentric writings, that they claim to have these ethics, but when it comes to some issues, they fell short. So, but they allowed her basically like the Fugitive Slave Act, which meant that any free Black person at any moment could be kidnapped and enslaved. So she moves to Philadelphia and begins her own Shaker commune of mostly Black women, but it was interracial group of largely domestic workers. So, Shakers were agrarian farmer people, but Rebecca Cox Jackson, being a Black woman and having not really having the means or the ownership of land the way the white congregants did, she like just started a house where all of these women, mostly domestic workers, it seems, worked and lived together as a Shaker commune. And I think that's just an amazing innovation. You're thinking about 38 or something for a Black woman to find her way into the solution so that she and her female partner, like this sort of like mini me, Rebecca Perot, who's often mistaken for her, like where they could live and live together and do their spiritual work. I just think that's amazing. And then we have Alice Coltrane, who, after losing her soulmate, love of her life, eventually makes her way with her 4 kids to California to deepen her study in these Vedic traditions and music. And her her practice then draws to her all of these Black people who have also found that Hindu religion and its Vedic practices really suited them, who are also musicians. And so they found Alice as their Swami. So I hope what I'm describing are these really actually successful utopian gestures where people made space in the world to live how they wanted to live, with whom they wanted to live in a way that enabled everyone to thrive. I'm so inspired by that. And people are doing this every day, all the time. Like making space and sharing space. Unless you're a millionaire or a billionaire or unless you are like financially successful, no one pays any attention. And in some ways, I think that might be really good. It might be why these little attempts at communality can exist at all. And so I thought I just wanted to propose, and I still think it's a legitimate proposal to say maybe we should look at this way of doing things, like maybe especially in the face of our current political climate and what to me seems clearly like the United States is, they failed to repair the country at the end of the Civil War, and this open festering wound is not really a wound. It's actually the deepest desire of many of the white citizens of this country, and they now have the power to make it happen. So it made me think about Derek Bell's book, Faces at the Bottom of the Well, where he basically says, American racism is permanent. It's not going anywhere. So then what? So then what do we do? And then actually there's all this evidence of what we do. We like start an ashram and we invite people to live on our land with us, where we rent out a building for women domestic workers and we work and share our resources together, or we build a beautiful, beautiful like urban artwork and we allow the children in the neighborhood to play on it. And then we gift it to the neighborhood, which is what Simon Rhodey do. Or we, accept a parcel of land from a fellow artist, like Ed Ruscha is one of the people that helped Noah Purifoy get the land in the desert, which is a mutual aid among artists. And we build and we build and we build, and then we leave it and gift it to the desert and gift it to anyone who encounters it. Like these are incredibly generous actions that demonstrate how alive we are in the face of struggle, in spite of struggle. And if we want to continue to exist in this country, it's pretty much all we have. I think at this point, it used to be that the federal government protected us, and now the federal government is really explicitly expressing their intentions to destroy us. So what do we have besides each other and what we can build? So to me, that's what utopia is. Sorry if that was depressing.
No, it's
No.
beautiful. That was really beautiful.
No, no, that's
Very
the opposite. No, like that's
yeah.
the opposite. Like because I think it can be very easy, and I don't want to offend anyone, but like I think it can be very easy to kind of slip into despair, and I think it can be very easy to say, oh well, everything's just messed up, and what can we do? And it's like I feel like in a way that that's like a little self-indulgent because it's like there are like to speak to your point and like all those examples you gave of people who kind of make care a part of their practice and who are saying like no, like we actually can build something different even in the midst of a lot of destructive forces that are out there. So no, like everything you said, like that was like the opposite of depressing. Like it's actually like really helpful, I think, to hear that even in the midst of a lot of chaos, like there are people, like there are so many examples of people who have directly worked to counteract that, or even, and then I think what you were saying too about Derek Bell, like that was even a really interesting way of looking at things, that like saying like this actually isn't going to go away. So what are we going to do in the face of that? And I think like you talking about all these examples of people who built something, even while, you could argue they were going through even worse things that we're going through now, or like at least like on par with what we're going through now. They were still able to create something that can help people, not just, their contemporaries, but also like people, after, like coming after them too. So yeah, like, no, like that was actually very fortifying to hear.
Oh, I'm glad.
Well, I guess like the last question I had was just, I guess like I was just like really interested in kind of how all the different, like all your different practices, like kind of like how do they all inform each other? And then just like kind of getting back into like that notion of care, kind of like how does that kind of inform, yeah, how is that like a part of all of your artistic practices? And then how do those practices kind of like all inform each other?
I gotta say, it's not a word that I like using a lot because it's a word that corporations and academic institutions have really taken up, even while absolutely failing to do that. I remember being in this very difficult not a challenging situation with a museum, and I was simply asking to have a conversation about the the question at hand, and I was kind of being brushed off and dismissed. And I finally said, I don't think you understand what's happening here. I'm asking to speak with you, and you're acting as if that's not important. But if I don't get to speak with you, I will stop working on this show. You will not have a show. I will not exhibit here. I had to actually throw down a gauntlet, right? And then all of a sudden, everybody's, and then I write a letter to the director saying, this is what's happened. And I don't understand why someone simply will not just speak to me. And then I get this frenzied response and listen to this man for 5 minutes talk about care. I'm like, care would have simply have been to speak with me. I shouldn't have even had to ask. I think there's a real failure between like the conceptual idea of like the way that institutions use this idea of like accommodating or sympathizing people, which is not the same as just simply engaging them and attempting to engage them in the present and just having an ethic about like addressing things as they are, as needed. And I think so I don't like using that word because I think like having a daily individual practice of attempting to treat people with regard. And I don't use the word respect because it suggests some kind of hierarchy about like a kind of applying some extreme honor, but I simply regard where I simply acknowledge that everyone has a right to live and be, to like really respect though and regard and honor like the labor that is contributed to anything that I do, and to try and actually do these things with some modicum of joy and gratitude, because if you can if you can do that and muster that, even if you can't sustain it all the time, it really, I find, emanates and flows through everything. Even if you're having a hard time and something terrible like is failing in a project, if you can just take a minute to at least like appreciate that there are people there going through it with you and that we're all going to try and solve it, even if we don't succeed. It's very different than sort of leaning into the disappointment that things aren't working out. So I think about just the kind of ethics of regard with my collaborators or with my students or with my faculty colleagues or with curators or journalists or whoever, just an attempt to have regard. And sometimes, it's disappointing when it's not reciprocated, but I would rather be the practitioner of the things I believe in than go around expecting everybody to practice them on me.
I feel like you've just said so many things that I've been wrestling with that I knew I was wrestling with, but I didn't have the words or hadn't digested it enough to be able to fully understand what I was thinking about. But your idea of care, as well as thinking about what are my ethics as it has to do with my ethics of regard, as you beautifully said. I find that so many times these conversations give me a tool or give me homework to think about, how do I want to show up in my life? How do I want to show up with my family? How do I want to show up in terms of being a good citizen? So thank you so much for holding such a mirror up.
Oh, it's so fun to think with you guys about it. Thank you.
Mhm. So, as we wrap up, you've sat through many interviews as well as podcast interviews, magazines, and so on. What's one question, or what's the question you wish interviewers would ask you, but they never do?
Oh, you know what? I realized with regards to dry long, so there seems to be a real misunderstanding about what happened in terms of my decision to not make films, where it seems like there's a belief that if things had gone differently, I would have if I had felt better about how the film was received then, I would have stayed in the film industry, or that there's something the industry is so unfair that it drove me out or something like that, that like, oh, if only or surely you want to make another feature film. And the truth is that I should have never been doing that in the first place. The truth is that I probably always was an artist and I really didn't know that you could be one. And so until I made friends with artists and I saw that, oh, this is like a viable life and a really great life, I didn't know it was even possible. And I only knew that film was possible because of people like Julie Dash and Spike Lee, because of the LA Rebellion, because of Charles Burnett. I was like, well, that's possible. But I didn't realize that the industry itself would be, what, at least for me, so toxic, or a place you have to be in order to be successful in the industry is just of no interest to me. And so like I just don't care about celebrities, and I don't care about being popular, and I don't care about I don't know. I just like most of what what you have to care about in the industry just on a day to day of like who you're gonna have lunch with or who you're gonna work with are things that don't interest me. So I had no business being there. I just spent a lot of time doing the wrong thing. I'm really grateful that I figured it out and pivoted when I did, albeit rather late. But because it is what I really enjoy doing, it's gone okay. And I think maybe that's a lesson for anyone who finds themselves. Maybe you're good at something, but it doesn't just because you're good at it doesn't mean you're supposed to be doing it.
Ooh,
Oh,
you
you're
just said a
muted.
word. You just said a word.
I was
I was
thinking
like,
the
"Oh,
same thing.
whoa." I was like, "Oh, wow, the way I needed to hear that." Like, oh, oh,
You didn't know that
wow.
this was going to be some kind of a therapy session.
I was just gonna say, just, thank you so much for being here, and thank you so much for just like sharing your insights, sharing your brilliance with us. Yeah, I just want to say, I just really appreciate you taking the time. So yeah, that's all I wanted to say.
Thank you for coming on the show, Colleen.
Oh, thank you so much for inviting me. It's really been a pleasure to speak with you. I'm really glad we did this. Thank you.
Hi there.
If you're loving this show, would you mind taking a quick second to leave us a 5-star review on your favorite go-to podcast app? While you're at it, subscribe to our Substack newsletter, Creative Matters. You can find the link to subscribe in the show notes. All right, that's all that I have for you today. Bye.